everybody. I'm Amy with Marina Wellness. So excited to be here with you today to do our pumpkin decorating. Just a heads up, we are not doing carving. So this is decorating the outside. We will go through, I have found a lot of supplies home. Just heads up, if you are not muted right now, give yourself a little mute. I can hear some noise coming through and I just don't want that to distract from anybody else's experience. Thank you so much. We will go through, if you are on and you're just looking for a little inspiration to maybe do some decorating this weekend, hopefully you'll have some takeaways here for that. So just to get started, I always make sure my surface is covered. Whether you take a paper bag and you cut that open and cover your surface, or you use a plastic trash bag, just make sure your surface is always covered, especially if you're working with paints or crayons. That's one of the projects we'll talk about here today. I also make sure that I always have handy some scissors. I'll be using some paint brushes. I'll have some painting options and then some options that are that you do not need any paint for, so stay tuned on those. And then I recommend, if you ever want to use a Sharpie, I recommend using a medium point or larger Sharpie or permanent marker if you plan to use those. Typically, if you're using a real pumpkin, that waxy texture does not do well with a fine point permanent marker. So something to keep in mind there. You can always test the very bottom of your pumpkins if you are using permanent markers. Test the very bottom. Usually nobody will see that very bottom, but then you'll know how your marker is going to do before you get started on the part that you might be able to see most often. So I'm going to start with some of the supplies that I walked around my house finding. I know a lot of us are working from home or are at home as we're doing these projects tonight. I've gone through, I have some of the things I have gathered that we'll talk about. So I have some painter's tape. I have some ribbon. I happen to have some black and white ribbon and some orange, black and white twine. Great options if you're doing something Halloween specific. If you are thinking fall and you want something that's going to translate through the rest of the season, maybe even for Thanksgiving, you'll want to do something obviously that's more in the oranges, yellows, browns, maybe a Thanksgiving pattern, something to keep in mind there if you do have those supplies. I went through my kitchen drawers, don't miss those kitchen drawers. I had some twine from my turkey from Thanksgiving from last year. So I have a project that I did with that. So we'll go over that. So just look through your home if you are searching for some supplies. I have crayons. If you are like our home, we have elementary aged kids. Well, one elementary still in elementary school. And we get at the end of the school year, we get that bag of crumbled up little pieces of crayon that come home. And then somehow that always ends up in one of our, in our desk drawers or one of our kids' drawers. And if you have some of those lying around, I have a project for you with crayons, those used crayons, or maybe you have a fresh box that you want to use. And then finally, we'll do some painting. We're actually going to start off with some painting. I recommend acrylic paint. Any sort of washable paint doesn't typically stick to either our regular pumpkins, our real pumpkins, or our fake pumpkins. So acrylic we found has worked the best. I keep a paper plate that I put my paint on. I recommend just doing about a dime to a quarter size amount of paint to start. You will find that your paint will usually go a long way. You don't need to use a lot to get started. So let's get started here with a few different options, especially for some of you who are maybe working with kids. This is a great option for you and really for anybody, but I always say this is a good one for little fingers. So we have 3 different options that are fingerprint painting. So this first one I have here, I have an orange pumpkin. I love these pumpkin pie pumpkins. They're great. It still feels like we have a lot of work to do. Just a warning, if you do have some big pumpkins you're working with, maybe you went to the pumpkin patch and you stocked up, just be prepared that it does tend to take longer to decorate some of those than it does some of these smaller ones. They're still a good amount of work on these small ones. So just a warning before you get started there. So I've started here and I have this cute little ghost fingerprint. So what I've done is I've just taken my fingerprint, here's my thumbprint right here, and I put that down on my pumpkin and I've decorated with some tiny little eyes and a little oval mouth. And I'll show you what I did here. So what I'm going to start with, and you can see here, this is just a variety of fingerprints, different sizes from everybody in my family just did some little fingerprints for me there. And here I have one size fingerprint. So if you're debating whether you want all your ghosts or your fingerprints to be the exact same size, this is what the same size would be. And then a little variety there, a fun one if you have a family who's working on one pumpkin together. So what I would do is I take my thumb or any fingerprint that I want, and I put that into my paint. I want to make sure that I have, I'm using my pointer finger, not my thumb. I want to make sure I have dabbed off, or I blotted off some of my paint. Keep in mind gravity when you're working with paint and pumpkins. If you have a lot that is dropping off your paint, or a lot of paint that's dripping down when you hold up your finger, you probably have a little too much paint. So make sure to blot that out a little bit, whether it be on a paper towel, a wipe, if you're using a paper plate like I am, just blot that out a little bit, just so it's not running down. And then I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna find some empty space. I have a few pumpkins that are prepped here, or I'm sorry, a few ghosts that are prepped here. So I would just go through and I'm just blotting that out. You should be able to do this a few times through. Once you get all the way around, it should be dry enough to do the face. And what I do is I actually like to take the back of a paintbrush. I like the control I get with the back of a paintbrush. The tip of it, you can absolutely use the bristle side if that's your preference. I just find, especially when I'm doing dots, like I am for eyes, or I'm making an oval for a mouth, I find that this is a nice way to be able to control it. So I dip this into my black paint. So for this one, I'm just using white and black paint. And I'm gonna go over, I have some of my fingerprints that are already dry. So I'm gonna go over the ones that are dry. If you are starting on this project, make sure you wait for these to dry. If you have a hairdryer handy, drying with a hairdryer about 12 to 18 inches away will speed up that process a little bit if you're needing to speed it up. So I'm gonna take the back of my paintbrush, a little bit more paint here, and I'm gonna dot my two eyes. So I have circles for eyes, if you're somebody who's working on shapes in your home. And I'm gonna do an oval for the mouth. So there I have my two dots for eyes, and I have an oval for a mouth. And once you get a chance to go through, you end up with a lot of cutie little ghosts around your pumpkin. If you are somebody that has a white pumpkin, you can absolutely do the same concept with any paint color, and you just want a little bit of black paint or even a black permanent marker to go over those dry spots as well. If you are working with somebody who, especially with some of our young kids who don't necessarily want to get their fingers dirty or don't want to get themselves dirty, take a cotton ball or a cotton pad, dampen it a little bit, and then you can do the same concept as the fingerprints. You can do that with a cotton ball or a cotton pad balled up. So there's that first idea for our fingerprint pumpkins. Two more ideas. So our second idea for fingerprint pumpkins are these cute little pumpkins. So all I did here, same thing as I did with my whites on my ghost. I have some orange here. And if you have an orange pumpkin, you can absolutely make white pumpkins on your pumpkin, pumpkin on pumpkin. So you're gonna look at them and you're probably gonna say, you know what, these don't look like pumpkins yet. Once you get that little stem on there, I take the back of my paintbrush, a little bit of a black, or a little bit of a green stem, excuse me, can make it look like a pumpkin, or a little black detail, some triangle eyes, a triangle mouth, can make it look like a jack-o'-lantern. So my idea is there for either pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns, or a mix of all of those. And then finally, turning this one around, I have some cute little cats that I did also. So I did fingerprints for my cats. I did some fat cats, some skinny cats, and I have some fingerprints here. And then I took the back of my paintbrush again, and I made triangle ears and some little whiskers. You can absolutely do those ears and the whiskers with a permanent marker as well. So something to keep in mind there. So our three different fingertip options, if you're gonna do that, our ghost, our pumpkins or jack-o'-lanterns, and then our little cats here as well. I'm gonna move right along here for some of the things that I'm also painting. I mentioned painter's tape. If you're somebody who has some painter's tape in your home, this could be a great option for you. Just doing some very clean lines on paint. And just like when you're painting a wall, painter's tape, the work is actually in laying the painter's tape, not in the actual painting. So I always start at the very, very top. I want to make sure that I go all the way up to the stem. This makes it easier to grab once my paint has dried. It makes it easier for me to pull that back. And I take my painter's tape from the stem all the way to the bottom to make sure I get those clean lines in there. And I would do that all the way around. If you're going to do something like a painter's tape, I recommend working vertically, work with the lines. And you don't have to go right on top of the lines, but we found when you work horizontally with painter's tape, we end up getting, it's that gravity again, we end up getting that paint seeping through some of the painter's tape just because of the direction of the lines on our pumpkin. So recommending going vertically. And then what I would do is once I have everything dry, I typically do about 3 layers of thinner paint on here. Think about it for those of you who paint your nails. Think about it like that. We just keep a couple layers going to make it get to the level of color that we want, our final level of color, rather than getting it all there at the same time to start. And then I would just pull this back, and I'd have some clean, very clean lines of where I have stripes. We've done this with, obviously with orange and black. It's really fun if you have a white pumpkin and you do some black lines, you kind of get a Beetlejuice inspired pumpkin with stripes. We've seen this for a Thanksgiving tablescape and doing a bunch of striped pumpkins down the table in oranges, yellows, and browns down the table, mixing stripes and even polka dots. So an idea there for you if you are somebody who's going more of the Thanksgiving fall route with painter's tape. And then moving to some other painted items. I had this cutie little Frankenstein right here. I kept the stem on the top, just did a little decorating for that. We're seeing a lot of stacking pumpkins. So that is an option. If you are planning to stack your pumpkins, our ones underneath obviously don't have much of a stem there. Just make sure you have lined up to see which one will work best as the front of your pumpkin. A lot of times they line up better in certain positioning. So just make sure you figure that out before you start stacking. If your family or anybody who's in your home is doing maybe a matching costume, this is a fun idea just to do everybody's costume and stacking pumpkins as well. So an idea there for you with paint. And then finally, our last one that's paint specific. I have this little pumpkin, I painted black. I put some little pipe cleaner on here. If you're gonna do something with pipe cleaner, I always recommend shaping the pipe cleaner. So I shaped my legs first, and then I hot glued these on. So another cutie little spider, takes up a little bit more space once we have those pipe cleaners on there. So some options just to start off with paint. If you are somebody who is not interested in paint options, I have this suggestion for you. I have some tool wrap around here. I have an orange pumpkin inside. This could absolutely work with a contrasting color. And I have some Halloween ribbon that I put on. If you want to do something like this for fall or Thanksgiving, switch out that ribbon so it's not as false or not as Halloween specific. So I have some black and white. I have some orange and black stripe that I've tied around. And then all I did here to do a clean line with my tool is I gathered this together. I always think about tools when I do this. And I did a clean line across the top. This is great for gift giving as well. So I did a clean line across the top. You could do something like this with a colored cellophane, even a tissue paper. Just beware if you use tissue paper, make sure you pick up your pumpkin from the bottom or else it'll go right through that tissue paper. So tool, tissue paper, colored cellophane, any of those would work for an option like this. This is great also if you are somebody who doesn't want to paint or put anything on yours because you're planning to carve later and you want to get those seeds out. You don't want to risk paint with your seeds. This could be an option for you as well. And then I said at the beginning, I had some twine that I used for a Thanksgiving turkey last year. If you have something like that, this could be a option for you. I started with my twine at the top with a little bit of hot glue to keep that in place. And I just started wrapping. So I made myself a little web using that twine. Any place that I put a little bit of dot to keep that twine in place, I just put some plastic spiders right on top of there. So another option with supplies you may already have at home that's a nice impact without being the work of painting if you want to do something like that. And then finally, if you are somebody who has crayons lying around, like I said, in our home, we had a bunch of crayons lying around. I have a melted crayon pumpkin idea for you. So we've seen this gain some popularity in the last few years. We started doing this in our home a few years ago. Our kids are now doing it on their own because it's their favorite way to decorate pumpkins. So I'd start with a pumpkin. If you have a Cinderella pumpkin or something that's a little bit flatter, you may not have to glue your crayons down. I hot glued our crayons on there. I happen to do a rainbow design. You could absolutely use any colors you want. I do recommend putting two of the same colors side by side just to give enough of the impact of the color. And I would do, my recommendation is also if you want more of a dark, if you want some dark high impact color, stick to some of our cooler colors, our greens, blues, and purples if you're working on an orange pumpkin. Some of our warmer colors, our reds, pinks, oranges, and yellows, are not going to show up nearly as well on here. So something to keep in mind if you do a crayon pumpkin. So please take my advice here, because I made the mistake of doing this incorrectly or making a mess the first time I did this a few years ago. Set your pumpkin inside of a box. So you want to make sure not just that your surface is covered for this one, but that the whole area around, you almost want to build some walls around your pumpkin. So you would set this inside of a pumpkin. You would set your pumpkin inside of a box and take a hairdryer, and for about 2 or 3 minutes, start to melt the crayons. After that 2 to 3 minute mark, take a break, let it cool off. This way, the crayons that are melting will stay up at the top. Then once you've seen it's cooled a little bit or it's not as runny, go again for another 2 to 3 minutes until your crayons, keep taking those breaks until your crayons are completely melted. If you just keep the hairdryer on it the entire time, we end up with a lot of the color at the very bottom. If that's the look you're going for, awesome. A lot of people would like it on the top half. And so we recommend in a box. You will have wax that goes flying. It took me forever to clean up the wax that went flying in our home a few years ago. So make sure you've set this in a box. That box can be trashed later. It actually looks really cool on the inside. It's a great way to practice a little science if you're working on that in your home. Show a few different options for things that melt. And then so set that inside of a box, 2 to 3 minutes with the hairdryer. Let that cool, then go another 2 to 3 minutes until you're completely melted. We found that it takes about 12 to 15 minutes to completely melt crayons. So this is a little bit of a process, but well worth it for the overall look, which is almost like a splatter paint or a confetti, but layered with crayons, heated crayons there as well. So again, if you have a rounded pumpkin like mine, you are going to want to make sure those crayons stay in place, or else you will have crayons flying. And if you are working with kids, please be aware that that wax will get really hot. So keep those hands away. We found that just looking in on it with an adult using a hairdryer is our best bet on keeping those pumpkins, or keeping those hands or anything from getting burned, and but still being able to watch. So that's the start. So I have those for you. If you are somebody who has, maybe you've got some kits or some bags of small pumpkins and you have some boards in there, don't leave out the boards. Make sure you take some of those boards, paint some of those if you have the painting option. You could do the warts of you could have it go sideways. You can absolutely do the warts on a witch. You can make it look like some bubbles with some white paint, but boards are awesome, really awesome to decorate with for Halloween as well. A lot of times we shove them aside for Thanksgiving, but these could be really fun also for Halloween decorating if you're doing that. I would love to take some questions. I know I talked fast, but I wanted to make sure I got you some time and we got through all of the ideas. Do we have anybody that has questions either by chat or wants to just jump on verbally, just so that we can, if you have any supplies maybe that you need some help or some ideas with? I can tell you that I just had somebody in a session who had feathers, and we suggested they make Hulk Hogan with a feather boa on it, and it started to come together really beautifully. So if you need some suggestions of any of the supplies you have, I would love to help you with that if there's an option there. Or if we have anybody who wants to share some of the things they're working on, we'd love to see some of those as well. So we're coming up on time, so I just want to make sure that I give you a chance to share that if you do want to share that. And while I have some of you probably getting ready, in terms of care for these, especially obviously if you have real pumpkins, you'll want to keep these in a cool space and not in direct sunlight. So if you have a porch that gets a lot of sunlight, an indoor space may be better for storing some of your pumpkins to make sure they last as long as you want them to last. Anybody want to share what they're working on? Okay, awesome. I'm going to plan to stay on. If you have any questions, I will be here. Feel free to send through on the chat. I think there are some final messages, so I want to make sure you get a chance to get those across too before people are off of the Zoom call. So thank you so much for being here. Happy fall, happy Halloween, happy Thanksgiving, and happy pumpkin decorating. It's great to be here with you all today.
Thanks so much, Amy. That was so much fun. I actually have a question for you. You had mentioned like a Cinderella pumpkin. What are those?
Cinderella pumpkins are the ones, I think they were nicknamed that because they look like the carriage from Cinderella. They're a little bit flatter on the top. They're flatter and wider pumpkins. So if you were doing something like a crayon pumpkin for those, they're easier to lay those crayons on top because the crayons have a place to sit, whereas some of these pumpkin pie pumpkins are much more rounded at the top.
Got it. Okay, so would you recommend if we had a Cinderella pumpkin, you'd recommend like the melting crayons or something like that?
Absolutely. And I've seen everything with almost any shape of pumpkin, and it really is. I think the crayon one is a great one to do if you do have the Cinderella option, then you can avoid the step of having to glue on those crayons.
Excellent. I love it. Well, I think we're probably going to do the crayon idea. I'm in my office right now, and I did not bring a hairdryer. So I would love to try that with my kids at home. So thank you so much for all of your fun ideas. Um, so everyone, thank you, Amy, for a fun class, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. I'm so glad that you all got to join us today. Reminder, please send your fun photos to alumni@apu.edu. I want to see what you're working on, see what you've come up with. You can send it afterward. I started mine. It is definitely not finished, so I'm not sending my picture just yet, but I will send it in when all my pumpkining is done. We will be sending an email with the video recording of this, so you can review it at a later time. Maybe if your kids couldn't join you, you can show your kids. There's some great ideas out there. Now for some upcoming events. Actually, one, we have saved the date for our in-person homecoming, which is coming February 11th and 12th of 2022. We're super excited about that. And then make sure to subscribe to all of our social media channels and our newsletter to be informed of any other upcoming events and opportunities. As always, we welcome everyone's input on new events that are coming out or anything that you want to see. So we would love to hear from you. But thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your evening.